gonna look at interracial relationships in this video. I'm gonna break down some key statistics as well as some key points as far as from my viewpoint. This is my viewpoint on interracial relationships in America. And just a breakdown of why this is actually a big thing and just certain historical elements involved with this, as well as currently what's going on with interracial relationships in America. So basically, interracial relationships are an old paradigm. So old paradigm, I would say, going back at least 10,000 years to even possibly even 100,000 years or older, as far as different humans breeding with different humans of a variety of skin complexions, features, as well as ethnic origin. I would say, again, it goes back to somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000 years plus. It's an old paradigm. And the fact that it's a big deal, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get right into it. Why is race a big thing in America? Okay, why is this thing called race? Why is this thing called interracial relationships such a big deal in America? And the reason why race in itself became a big deal in America, it starts before you can even get to America. It starts over in Europe. So in the Enlightenment period, around the 15 and 1600s, they came up with a framework of basically racial groups, and the classifications based off of appearances. Okay. And they broke down different classifications of people according to where they come from, what land they come from. So you basically had Europeanists, Asiatics, and Afars, which would be considered Africans. Okay. And this was started by a Swedish botanist called Carl Linnaeus in his early 1700s. Before him, Francis Bonner, 1684, a French doctor, created a new division. He wrote a book, and it, of course, was published, and it was called A New Division of Earth, which is one of the first publications to classify humans into distinct races. So, one of the earliest European scholars that came up with the construct of race was French doctor Francois Bernier. Okay, he was one of the first persons of European descent to come up with the idea of race. The idea of there's more than one type of race. There's different types of races. And basically, the word Caucasian was first termed by a German anthropologist, Johann Friedrich, 1752 to 1840. He coined the term Caucasian because he believed the skull from the Caucasus Mountains was basically the start of where Europeans were believed to be of origin. He He went to the Caucasus Mountains. It's pretty much the Caucasus Mountains is over towards where the Eastern Bloc, where like Georgia, the country of Georgia, and over in Eastern Europe. That's where the Caucasus Mountains is. He found skulls of these early Caucasoid type humans, and he came up with the term Caucasian from that. So the term Caucasian came about in the late 1700s. And he also classified 5 different races: Caucasoid, Mongoloid, and Ethiopian, and American, and also Malayan. Okay, so that was 5 different races: Caucasoid, Mongoloid, Malayan, Ethiopian, and American. And after like going into things basically progressed in the 19th century, there was a American physician that basically collected a bunch of human skulls, and he was measuring the skulls and the cranial capacity by filling them with basically different things like pepper, lead shot from like shotgun shells, and he claimed his data show a hierarchy of intelligence with Caucasians at the top, followed by Asians, Native Americans, and Africans at the bottom. His work was used for pro-slavery advocates in the U.S. He wrote a book about this, I'm sure, and basically people that were pro-slavery, they used his studies to uh, propagate slavery. Okay, because slavery was still going on around this time. So those are some of the few scholars, and then of course you have Darwin, which is from the early 1800s to the early 1900s. He came up with the theory of evolution, which was basically that there's a dominant and a recessive in every type of animal. Okay, and the superior um, one in that gene group or animal group will naturally be destined to dominate the inferior ones. Okay, and that's where you got the theory of evolution, as well as his cousin Francis Galton, which is Darwin's cousin. He was the first term to coin the term eugenics, which is the idea of improving the human population through selective breeding. Francis Galton of 1822 to 1911. So you got Darwin with the theory of evolution, then his cousin, probably most likely piggybacking on his cousin's work, came up with the idea of eugenics, basically selective breeding to quote unquote improve human population through selective breeding, eugenics. Then, of course, after that, you had eugenicists that started to, run with that idea, and you got Margaret Sanger, which basically went to different parts of where Negroes, because that's what the term that was called for Black Americans in the early 1900s. She basically convinced a lot of young African American women at that time, Negro women as they were called, to basically have some type of avenue in case they got pregnant to be able to eliminate that offspring. I mean, I'm sure that the people at that time didn't understand um, what was going on as far as eugenics, or they didn't have any idea of what nefarious idea or plot that this woman had. But they knew the burden of having children, and that burden was, and it's still to this day, is heavily strained on black women, because black people in a whole do not have the least amount of wealth in America. Okay, so having children is historically burdensome for a lot of black women in America, as well as black men. It's mostly lower class because they don't really understand much. They're not highly educated. They have a lot of financial fears, being at that bottom. And then you got to understand, this was basically before the New Deal. So this was before Social Security, before welfare. Okay, before welfare was signed into law. Okay, so you were pretty much on your own. A lot of black women were very poor. A lot of black people at that time, early 1900s, lived in slums, lived in slum houses all throughout the big cities in Chicago, New York, and other parts of the country. So they went to this lady to get help in order to um, not have as many babies as they normally have. Black women historically have been very, very fertile, and tend to have more fertility than others, and they'd have a lot of children, and those children will be a burden for them. So this woman, Margaret Sanger, came to aid these women with this eugenist idea that these women, I'm sure, didn't know what was going on. They came to as her as some help to deal with this burden, and she was more than happy to, because her idea is, if I eliminate as many of these black babies as I can, I will be performing the eugenics. So that's where you have basically a lot of the modern abortion movements like Planned Parenthood and others is based off of that idea of eugenics. So I know I skipped ahead from slavery and all of that. Didn't really talk much, but you can't really talk about interracial relationships without talking about basically the slave trade. I just wanted to break down where the idea of race um, started, because that's very important, and that also led to the conquesting of African slaves. You have these early European scholars that saying that these people are lesser people, so it's okay to enslave them. Okay, so basically from that, you have basically a lot of things going on at that time. One, Europe was not all white. Europe was very much a mix of different ethnic minorities that were in Europe, and they were, when I say in Europe, they were in the royalty class in Europe, as well as the lower, less noble class in Europe. So you have some kings, some princes, some noblemen that were have had black origin, have black ancestry, that were in Europe. Like, the whitewashing of history was just another way to tell lies to propagate one person over another, and that one person would be the white man and woman as being having no linkage to other ethnicities. You know, they were just there in Europe by themselves. That's the story that's been told for hundreds of years. That's why people are racist, primarily because a lot of people that are racist, they have been miseducated through the modern education system that um, basically the origin of it was these scholars in Europe. They came up with certain ideologies that propagated race for separation purposes, for divide and conquer. Okay, if you separate this group, it'll be a group against another group. It worked out to very much their advantage. It's not so much working out now because there's a lot of nuances, but I'll get to all of that. But basically, yeah, during the slave times, interracial relationships were the only person that had the possibility of having an interracial relationship without the scourge or possibility of death was white men. Okay, white men can sleep with white women as well as black slaves or even black freed women. Okay, they basically had full autonomy to sleep with as many black women as they wanted to throughout the period in the United States, going back early as the 13 colonies. White men had full access to African women in America. Black women only dated or got with black men to breed and have children. They had families, but they were under constant pressures to have to give their body away to white men. Okay, because it's just a power structure. White men were at the top of this power structure. Only person that was fighting them at the time was Native Americans. Okay, um, but basically that was what was going on at that time. And if a white woman got with a black man, it was a possibility that both can meet their demise. Very much so, the black man would probably be first to meet his demise. By just to spare her life, she would probably say she was raped or she was forced in order to be the innocent party in that scenario. So she didn't have any possible consequences. Okay, so it was very deadly for a black man to have interrelationships with white women from, you could just say, 1600s all the way, really pretty much up until the 1960s. Okay, the 1960s was a turning point. Okay, is a major turning point in America. And this is very interesting because you had miscegenation laws that I think only ended recently, not too long ago. And then, of course, you had Jim Crow, which was basically separate and unequal uh, separation of blacks and whites. Okay, and after the 1960s, of course, civil rights movements and things of that nature, as well as the winds of change, because basically Africans in Africa were fighting Europeans in Africa to basically European colonialists to have their independence. So you had a lot of things going on in the 1960s, but basically, what major change that opened um, interracial relationships to where white women can get with black men primarily and other men as well was after the 1960s. And what sprung from that was what made that happen was a couple things. Of course, things were changing. Society was changing. Basically, this was after the Vietnam War. Um, basically, the Vietnam War was after the Korean War, and you basically had the first wave of basically China rising. Okay, after the 1960s, China started to rise, but that's something separate. That's not necessarily, um, that was basically it played a role because a lot of people died from the Korean Wars and Vietnam. So a lot of young servicemen lost their life and they didn't come home. And basically, women um, were part of what was the major change in America, which was the hippie movement. The hippie movement brought forth a lot of different things: peace and love, and the sexual revolution. And during that time of the sexual revolution, you also have feminism. Now, in just to in case you're like from another country and you don't know what the feminist movement is about, the feminist movement, to in short, is basically AKA, or also known as, you can't tell me what to do. If you wanted to short sum up the feminist movement to a sentence, basically the feminist movement is women telling men, and all men, men from high places such as ju- judicial and executive branch, the president, their fathers, okay, grandfathers, uncles. You can't tell me what to do anymore. I want to make my own decisions. Okay. Now, I scrutinize the feminist movement quite often, as well as other men. Um, but one of the things you gotta be, because you gotta be. I'm a person that, I'm not gonna say you gotta be, but I'm a person that I have to be honest. You know, that's one of the things that separates me from other YouTubers is I have to be honest, even if it doesn't support narratives, or it doesn't support, even if it's embarrassing to even me. I have to um, state the truth. Even though if it's, I've scrutinized things or whatever, I have to do that. So one of the tripped out things that I have to point out about the feminist movement, as well as all the scrutiny that I've had for it and I have for it now, you can't say, um okay, basically the feminist movement is the reason why there's interracial relationships where white women can get with black men. And it goes by, and the reason why is basically why, when I said the feminist movement can be summed up in one sentence, uh, men, you can't tell me what to do. Well, basically, white women were heavily controlled by white men, as well as their family structure. As, yes, you can't date out. You can't date this. You can't bring this black man over. You can't bring this N word over here. Don't deal with this person. And white women had to do that. They had to not deal with this person that is of another ethnicity because of the scrutiny of society at that time, as well as their fathers. Okay, and even family in general. They were under heavily, they were heavily scrutinized for basically if they dealt with anything out of the ordinary, which is another white man. Well, the feminist movement and basically women being more independent and being able to make their their own decisions based off of what they want brought in basically it basically brought in uh, the first like because basically I pre 1960, even I would even say in 1960, in order to have an interracial relationship, you would risk death. Even in 1960, if you were in the South and you tried to have an interracial relationship, you'll probably be hung up by a tree, or you'll be the candidate for someone to be hung up on a tree because it just wasn't something that they were letting anybody get away with. They were under heavily, um, if you want to say, patriarchal, good old boy club control. All of the women were under that structure, as well as the other women, uh, you know, controlling the other women as far as don't date out. What are you doing? You can't do that. Like that was it. Really didn't start. Really, interracial relationships really didn't start um having their breakout period really to where it be kind of somewhat safe until the 80s and 90s. Okay, the 1980s and 90s, you can have an interracial family. It wasn't liked, but you wasn't gonna risk death. No one was gonna come after a black man with his white wife. You just basically were heavily scrutinized for it. I mean, even still to this day, 2020, you're scrutinized for interracial relationships, but it's not as much as it was, you know, from the '60s and any time, later, but 1960 was definitely a kind of a break in the glass of this idea of a white woman dating or even mating and having marrying a black man primarily because the emphasis was more strong on, even though white people didn't necessarily want to date a white woman to date anyone, the scrutiny was heavy on black men. Black men were the enemy, and if you slept with them, that was just a no no. Well, after feminist movement, the sexual revolution, and the hippie movement, things started to change in America. Okay, and there some of the white racists or white nationalists, they believe that the interracial paradigm is pushed by the Jews. It is a way for the Jews to undermine Anglo-Saxon, um, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, as well as white Anglo-Saxon Catholics, or in general, white evangelicals. White evangelicals pretty much make up most of the country. Most of the country is Christian of origin, and most of the population is white American Christians. So white evangelicals would encompass all of them. So a lot of the white nationalists believe that the Jews have some type of agenda to where they are trying to push interracial relationships down the throat of white people and others in order to miscegenate, which means basically combining different ethnicities and origins and having relationships and children, to basically weaken or wipe out or undermine white people in America. which Jews are technically white people, but they're also Jews, which is different, but they don't necessarily identify as Jews. You don't necessarily have a you don't the job applications don't say Jews on there. They say other, but most Jews I would say on their birth certificate would probably say white because they are ethnically white because they're European. Most of the Jews in America, even in Israel, are European of origin, Ashkenazi or some other type of European um, Jewish tribe or region. And basically, they believe that these Jews um, are undermining white people by pushing, by having an agenda to push interracial relationships. Um, as far as I've never heard anything about that other than online. I mean, all of a sudden I'll say, I think like in the late 90s or early 2000s, I started to notice a lot of commercials that were interracial. They were like they were like going out of their way to market interracial couples in advertising. Now, you could say, okay, one of the things that we know now, a lot of Jewish wealth or business ownership in certain concentrations, such as media and film. Well, a lot of Jews do own media companies. So when you're pushing, if you're saying, okay, they're pushing all of these commercials and everything, and even movies, and even just in general, uh, these displays of interracial couples. Well, it's kind of hard to you know to say different because you do have a lot of Jewish media ownership. Okay, that's a well known fact. That's just a well known fact. I mean, um, Jews have probably the most financial power in America, even only being less than what, like quote unquote 3% of the population or something like that. They're half of all of the billionaires in the United States and a third of all millionaires in the United States. A lot of financial power. Okay, so um, I don't really necessarily know about that one, but that's what a lot of what, like I say, white nationals believe when it comes to the plot. They believe it's a plot by Jews to undermine white evangelicals, basically white people in America. So the thing is that, like, as of now, there's no stigmatization much as it used to be. There is still stigmatization for interracial couples because of primarily in America, because America has a more harsher um, element of racism that they've had in America versus in Europe. I've heard this many times, like in the UK, people are just, breeding all over the place. Like it's a bunch of interracial couples. Everybody is just breeding with each other and being British and drinking tea and fish and chips and um, you know, that's what I heard. Okay, now um, the UK has what I heard is more of a class concept than America. Like America is not there yet as far as America's not really classist like that. The UK, from what I've heard, everybody's in particular class groups. It's not necessarily most about race, but class. That's what I heard. I've not lived there. I've not been there. If you watch this video and you're from the UK and you want to put your 2 cents in, I'm more than my comment section is more than welcome for you to, um, you know, put your viewpoints in and let me know from your perspective, from someone living in the UK. Last person I talked to that is actually British or from the UK, um, a guy that works in tech. He's kind of famous, actually. He said that his sentiments were as such like there's not a big deal about race over there. Everybody intermix. It's not racism or interracial relationships is not a big deal. The concept is not a big deal there. But there's not that many black people in the UK. It's more black people in America than in the UK. So I think it's like the black people are like 10% of the population in the UK. In the UK, it doesn't have a big population like the United States with 300 million people. So you have different elements over there. But the thing is the reason why I brought that up is uh, basically United States is more racist. It has more of a extremely racist history, violently a violent racist history in America. So that's why the idea of interracial relationships is so extreme, so much of a big deal, right? Um, you know, so so the thing is that's one of the major reasons why that this concept is a big deal. Well, now 2025, I would even say the last 10 years, there's been a lot of interracial relationships. Okay, I have to say, I have to admit, I engage in interracial relations. I mean, you know, I mean, it is what it is. Like, I'm not, I'm not to make this personal, but I mean, it's not a big deal. Okay, it's not really that big of a deal in my opinion, but it is still for white people. Okay, and also black people as well. Black people have um their you got black people that they don't want to necessarily have any interracial relationship either, right? The biggest thing though that when it comes to white women is also going back to class is being outcasted. A lot of white women have to make a decision when it comes to their family. If they know their family, which I would say most of white families are probably in general non accepting towards interracial relationships, especially a black man being in an interracial relationship with a black man. That might differ from different places to places or whatever, but and families to families. But most of white women, if they did choose to date a black man and even go beyond that, having children and having a relationship, a lot of white women have to make a decision on if they're accepting to be outcasted by their family. Now, when it comes to black women and getting with white men, it's different. It's historically different, and even the reason why black men get with white women is different than how black women get with white men, and I'll get to that. But when it comes to white women and getting with black men, a lot of them might have to make a decision in order, if they are accepting to be outcasted, because some of them are still have that situation where the father and the mother and father does not want to accept the woman's relationship. Now, if the woman is probably in a lower class, it's 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 not that big of a deal, because it's like, okay, it's it's like at the end of the day, what I'm offered is a trailer park, right? Or even probably middle class. It's not that big of a deal for a white woman with some lower class background or even middle class background, to where she pretty much knows she doesn't have any inheritance. Her parents are just workers. They live a middle class life and they're barely kind of scraping by a little bit, and they don't have enough money. Their parents don't have enough money to really retire, so they probably don't have much inheritance to offer. So it's not much risk to, if she was to be outcasted, other than maybe not having the affection and acceptance and love of her parents, which is not to be overshadowed. I'm sure that is enough, but yeah, in a lot of white people are not of higher class, so the class issue becomes a dividing line of white women who choose to have interracial relationships. If the woman has some type of inheritance, or she, has something that she's going to be entitled to because her parents are have some type of wealth, she might not want to choose to have an interracial relationship. It all depends. I would say most of what I notice is upper class women tend to not have interracial relationships, other than probably if they do with a black man that is of a higher income bracket or higher income status. That way, she's not she doesn't have anything that she's necessarily losing. But for the most part, what I notice is most upper class women, they might sneak and have interracial relationships, but they marry someone in their social class that is primarily white or even Jewish. I mean, basically, keep the family happy. Okay. So when it comes to black women in dating, or having interracial relationships, or white men having interracial relationships with black women, it's a different complex, in the sense of, it's not like when it comes to black men choosing white women to have interracial relationships. It's a thing of, I'm choosing this man. I mean, I'm choosing this woman because she has some power. Okay. It's not to say that it's not black men that have white women helping them in business and different things of that nature, because they can open doors and get phone calls and get access to things that open the door to that white world that they can't do. I'm not saying that that doesn't exist, but usually that is not why black men are getting with white women, to have some type of access to wealth and power. That's not what typically black men get with white women for. But when it comes to black women, you'll see this online. You'll see this on TikTok. their aspirations to get with white men is to have some type of access to that power, to have access to the wealth, the possible, like basically get with a rich white man, right? Um, that's that's the dream of a lot of women that would consider themselves someone that's looking for interracial relationship with a white man. They're looking for the financial power that that particular white man would have, and also even just probably access to overall power, because white people have a certain social power, a higher social power in America, higher social influence, media coverage, film and TV. They have different layers of power, and a black woman getting with that 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 financial power primarily is a comfort, in a sense, to be able to have access to that, to be able to get some type of access to that wealth, and also live in a certain community. One of the things that I notice a lot when you go into upper class, primarily suburban communities, as well as even you know cities like Chicago, um, in these upper class areas, you will see black men with white, black women with white men, and um, it's usually black women that are highly into luxury and fashion, and basically, kind of almost to a certain extent, kind of like a model. They're kind of like into, almost like their life is like very similar to being like a model, right? And they date these white male yuppies, right? That live in these upper class enclaves, upper class suburbs, and they're in proximity to that wealth. You normally don't see black women by themselves living in these houses. If you see black women, a lot of times, and this is just some of the things I observed in Illinois. Um, a lot of times when you see black women that are in these areas, they're living with a white man in these high price areas, or they're either married, or they're living in some type of boyfriend and girlfriend relationship, or long term relationship. They're living with this white man in this expensive house, in this area, and they might work in the same area as well. So that's one of the things that I observed. Okay, it's one of the things that I observed when it comes to the relationships that I see with black women and white men. Um, a lot of times when I see different relationships, such as black men with white women, it might be a fling type of thing, where because you got certain uh, black basically white women that they have a fetish for black men, and it's just something that they just like. They have a fetish for, and they just want to get their fix, and then they want to go back to maybe either being with their white husband or their white boyfriend, and that's it. And then you have some that just only date black men, and that's it. That's all they date. And it's it's also happen chance relationships. You meet someone at a job, or you meet someone in college or whatever. Then you have a relationship from that. But it's usually a situation where the black man likes the idea of this white woman, and she might be a little different as far as her behavior, because most white women are brought up in a household with a father, and it's something that they learn to listen to their father, listen to their grandfather, so they tend to listen more, even quote unquote possibly even be more submissive, because they have men in their life that they've had practice with, usually their father, their uncles, their grandfathers, on how to listen to a man. And usually they are rewarded from listening to their father by basically getting Christmas gifts and birthday gifts, and getting money to go to the mall. So it's, they have some type of positive reinforcement to it. Well, you have on the opposite end of that black women that have not had that. So that's where the dichotomy comes in, to where these white women are able to fill the void, where is they omit. I'm not saying all of them, but they are able to have a certain behavior pattern that is different and more submissive than um, dealing with the average black woman, right? So that's an element is that a lot of black men have professed, as far as their having an interracial relationship with a white woman. Even Asian and Hispanic women, it's the same kind of sentiments or whatever. But that's one of the reasons. And you have black men that probably, I would even say, have the same type of element, where they only want to deal with white women because they don't they have some type of disparaging idea of dealing with black women, or they don't want to deal with black women for whatever reason. And you also have the element as well, but it tends to be not associated with, oh, she got a whole bunch of money. Not that I have not seen that. I've seen that before. I've seen black men that kind of are more, kind of like a gigolo, where they're dealing with white women because they got a little money, or they got a car, um, got some type of access to some money or something from their family or their dad or whatever. I've seen that as well. I've seen some black guys deal with white women because they might be kind of financing their relationship, you could even say, or whatever. But most of the times, the latter is that they have some type of liking towards black men for whatever reason, and they have some type of you know relationship from that. And it's not nothing to do. It's usually not nothing to do with, oh well, she's got a whole bunch of money and she can, we can have this life and live this place to where, it's going to be comfort and all of that. Because usually another thing that, if black men try to date white women or have relationship with white women and live in some type of plush suburb or something, that couple is going to have some type of backlash. They're not going to be socially accepted like a white man with a black woman. Black women tend to be left alone in relationships. They might get disparaging comments from other white women, maybe in peer teacher conference, or some type of communal um, activity where they got to pick their kids up from soccer practice, or they have to, do some type of school function. They might get looks or comments or whatever because they're not socially accepted by other whites or even other groups, ethnicities. But for the most part, black women are seen as non-threatening or less threatening and are socially historically accepted to deal with white men. You know, when it comes to the opposite end of that, for the most part, a lot of black men have to do things a different way. They might have to be in the shadows more, and in certain regards, even the white woman would might not have to. She might have to even keep her relationships kind of in the shadows or whatever, or not really be wide spread about that. I mean, I think that's why you have relationships where actors they don't even show pictures of their wife until maybe they start to get some type of success in their career or something like that. Then they pop up with their white wife and then deal with the blowback of that. But initially, no one knew that they had a white wife. So it's not fully acceptable in America like that on both regards. But um, I would say for the most part, it's more acceptable historically speaking for uh, black women to get with white men. Okay, and I don't believe for a second that if white men didn't have the financial powers that they had, or even other social powers as well as others, that black women would be that attracted to get with white men if they had the same type of wealth dynamic that black men have. I wouldn't think for a second that that would be a driving point. But I mean that's kind of dealing with race and class, or even race and wealth. You want to even say, but one of the things as far as me doing research also that I have to point out, and it's quite interesting about interracial relationships, was that basically when it comes to interracial relationships, the higher class, the higher educated class, the more interracial couples there are. Actually, people that have a high school diploma or less have the lowest interracial marriages. And it doesn't break down black or Asian or Hispanic or other. It just puts it into a big category of interracial couples. The least intermarried or intermarried interracially is basically people with high school diplomas or less. People with bachelor degrees or higher intermarry in interracial relationships the highest. They have a 66% higher inter marriage or interracial marriage rate than people with high school diplomas or less. So that's all I have on this. I just felt compelled to have this discussion. I really don't talk about race relations that much on this channel, but social issues do affect other parts, of the society, and it affects different things to where it plays a role in your everyday life. So you can't, it's something that you can't avoid. So talking about social issues is something that I do from time to time. I mean, basically, at one time I was going to school for sociology. So from time to time, I will talk about social issues on this channel, and it's all relative, So I think that people think that it is something that's valuable because I tend to get views on certain social issues as well. So anyway, this is Broke Genius. Like, share, subscribe. and share this video to anyone that you feel might like this video.